chairs, and And this auction started at 10 and it went on for hours, selling this stuff off for like a nickel a box. Finally, about 2 o'clock in the afternoon, 2:30, the last item left, of course, was that clock sitting off over in a corner. And so the bidding began wherever. I got in somewhere in the 60s. And it ultimately was between just two of us, bidding in $1,000 increments. Finally got up to where the bid was $85,000. It was his bid, and so I was going to have to drop out, at which point I said to myself, to hell with that, I will bet my pension fund on this thing. We're going to get it for Annapolis. So I bid $86,000 and he dropped out. So, now it was kind of a wreck because you can't really see it now, but the feet have cut off. I mean, it was this family. It was an Annapolis woman who married a Virginian in 1776, probably a wedding gift, and came down through the family in Virginia. And as they moved from the great mansions with the 15-foot ceilings down to the local trailer park with the 8-foot ceilings, they kept hacking off the top and bottom of this clock. So you can't really see, but the top was clearly wrong, and the feet were clearly cut off as well. So Historic Napa spent at least $40,000 restoring it over many years. And here's the way it started. Well, again, you can't see the top, so there's really not much point in this. This is the way that you probably see it. I think it's still in the Pega House, but beautifully restored. And as I say, quintessentially Annapolis at the end of the Golden Age, this period when we could support the kind of craftsmen who could make a very high style, very classy clock, just like they could in London. Made locally, a lot cheaper, of course, but nevertheless, there was a market for that because that upper middle class, well-to-do class of folks here had a certain demand for that.
Where is it?
Last I heard it was in the dining room. Shaw Chisholm clock with a face signed by William Ferris, and it's all documented and signed. Okay, so the point about the Golden Age is that if in fact we'd been reincarnated backwards to the 18th century, we wouldn't have lived in a house like that. Only about 1 to 2% of the households had the kind of things that we think of today in terms of the Golden Age. The things we visit on the house and garden pilgrimages in the spring. The reason we go to Colonial Williamsburg and visit the Peyton Randolph House and the Palace. We wouldn't have lived in those kinds of things. We would have been living in the kind of house that almost every Maryland family lived in, and that would have been an earth-fast house, no foundation, just posts sunk into the ground, made all of wood, including the chimney. A very, very different kind of life experience for those folks who live that way. And the important thing for us to remember is that's the way most people live. Okay, we're going to move on.
Greg. Question?
Yes. Yes.
Where did the other 38% live?
Well,
You showed two.
we have a lot of those kinds of houses in Annapolis, the tradesman houses and things like that, that aren't kind of those rudimentary houses that were primarily in the country. And yet we're not the great mansions we find also.
I need something in between.
Look at that.
Is there feet on it?
No, he has no toes, but
We'll get it. We'll get it.
Oh, what about I heard it.
perfect.
Pull it out.
Excellent.
Okay, I can't hold it here the whole time though, so we do need to figure out.
Please try.
Can you jumble this?
Here.
Perfect.
Until there's stuff on the bottom.
Okay, we are going to begin a rapid run towards the revolution. I'm going to just sort of mention some of the highlights. I'm not going to give you the whole story. There just simply isn't time. I do want to begin in 1732 when Charles V, Lord Baltimore, visited Maryland. Charles V, Lord Baltimore is that proprietor who became Lord Baltimore when he was just 15 years of age when his father, Benedict Leonard Calvert, died in 1715. So he'd been head of Maryland, the proprietor, for a number of years. Decided to make a visit. It was a very brief one, 8 or 9 months, but it caused great excitement. The colonial elite were all planning their parties and getting new dresses and all of that because, I mean, this is a baron that is visiting Maryland. The owner of Maryland. How exciting if he would accept an invitation to your place. He was the first resident proprietor in Maryland since his grandfather Charles III Lord Baltimore. So only 2 of the 6 Lords Baltimore that we had throughout the colonial period actually visited Maryland. Charles III Lord Baltimore, who came over as governor in 1661 and became a resident proprietor of Maryland when his father died in 1675. He stayed here until 1681, so we had several years where he was actual proprietor. And then his grandson, Charles V Lord Baltimore, who was here for 8 or 9 months in 1732-33. He came over not just hobnob with the rich and famous Marylanders, but also to do some things that were frankly almost Machiavellian in their nature. He came over to scope out the situation to figure out how he could undercut the growing power of the lower house of the General Assembly. One of the things he realized when he got here was how important it was to have a circulating medium. The whole point of the British colonial system was to suck all of the hard currency out of the colonies and bring it home to the mother country. That was very effective in the tobacco colonies, Virginia and Maryland. And in fact, there was almost never any circulating money. You couldn't go down to the store and buy something. You had to, have book debt, and that became cumbersome, particularly when you just wanted to go down to the store and buy something small. So there was this growing chorus of support for some kind of paper money that would be backed by the government, that could be used in small denominations to buy things. And so he realized that was such a popular issue that he authorized the legislature to create 90,000 pounds in small denomination bills. So it made him a great hero with the public. I mean, it was something wonderful. He also, while he was here, and in the euphoria over the small currencies the currency that he had authorized, this kind of got overlooked by most people. He said, the uncertainty of going from year to year and not knowing what all of my governor and the other placeholders here in the colony, they're always complaining they don't know for sure what kind of salary the legislature is going to give them. We are going to establish a list of fees for all of our proprietary officials, including the local clergyman, the governor, everyone in between. So he established this table of fees, and then he went about doing something that was really very clever. He went to the leadership of the lower house of the assembly, the people that were causing him the most trouble in the Maryland Assembly, and he said, I'm going to offer you a job that you can't refuse. And he started out with the most important and influential member of the lower house of the General Assembly, Daniel Delaney the Elder, who was the leader of the lower house, the leader of the opposition to the proprietor, and he said, I'm going to give you this lucrative job, that lucrative job, and a third lucrative job. And he did just that. He gave him 3 very important proprietary jobs: agent receiver general, commissary general, and that last one. It was literally too much money. And all of a sudden, the main opposition to Lord Baltimore in the lower house of the General Assembly became his staunchest supporter, Daniel Delaney. He then continued doing this with other leaders of the assembly, whose names I can't read, but they included people like Edward Lloyd on the Eastern Shore, just a number of very prominent people, Wardleys, anyone who got too much power in the lower house of the General Assembly was going to be offered a job in the proprietary establishment that they really couldn't afford to pass up. I mentioned all of this, and it's all fairly obscure, but I mentioned it because there's something that you probably talk about on your tour, and that's the old Treasury building, the oldest public building still standing in Maryland. They're on the State House grounds, built between 1735 and 1736. It was built to house this 90,000 pounds in small denomination bills. And down here is one of them. You can just see 1 shilling, so they were small. This whole piece of currency was just for a shilling. There were some for fractions of a shilling as well. There were 3 commissioners of the Treasury. They would meet in this building, and they would haul out these books of printed denominations, sign them, and then they became valid currency in the colony. And here's a portrait of Daniel Delaney the Elder, that first sellout, as we'd see it today, from the loyal opposition in the General Assembly to become a prominent proprietary official. His visit in 1632-33 led to a long period of time here in Maryland, really, in effect, up to the end of the colonial period, that the Maryland historian Chris Aubrey Land has termed the politics of irreconcilabilities. On any issue that came down the pipe, the proprietary forces, the proprietor himself, and his supporters in the upper house of the assembly would take one position and the lower house would take another, and they would be at loggerheads. And this just simply continued all the way through the end of the colonial period, very much like the modern United States Congress. Someone says this, it's going to be opposed by that side, and it doesn't make a difference what the merits of the issue are. So, politics of irreconcilability. Lord Baltimore's visit did much to bolster his authority in the colony. That fee bill, which established the fees for proprietary officials, no longer a matter of political debate. Nevertheless, anti-proprietary sentiment continued to grow in Maryland. Lower house leaders hammered away at a number of issues, saying that fee bill of 1733 was illegal, that it should have been gone through the General Assembly rather than done by proprietary fiat. The proprietary officials were corrupt and inept. They especially zeroed in on the Anglican clergy. Anglican clergy had very special positions, many of them very lucrative. Many of them did stray from the straight and narrow in their personal lives, which was brought out by the opponents of the proprietary establishment. The proprietor, of course, appointed the Anglican clergyman. Proprietary fees were excessive or in violation of the Maryland Charter. All of these things were themes that throughout this period from the 1730s to the end of the colonial period, the members of the lower house of the General Assembly hammered at over and over and over and over again. Frederick, 6th Lord Baltimore, became proprietor in 1751 upon the death of his father. His father had served a very long time as proprietor of Maryland and Lord Baltimore, 1715. His death in 1751. Frederick, 6th Lord Baltimore, not a bad-looking guy, was 20 years old when he became Lord Baltimore. The problem was he was a very, very, very bad person. You hear about bloodlines kind of fading out over the generations. They really did in the Calvert family. You start out with a really great George Calvert and a really great Cecil, 2nd Lord Baltimore, and as the generations went on, the family faded, and it faded really, really far with Frederick VI, the last Lord Baltimore. He had only one interest in Maryland, and that was how much money he could squeeze out of the colony. He had absolutely no concern about the affairs of Marylanders or political issues or anything like that. He just, every letter was more money, more money, more money, and demanding that his proprietary governors and other officials here put the screws to the colonists in any way possible to get more money out, because he had an exotic lifestyle and he needed the money. He traveled extensively throughout Europe and the Middle East, settled in Istanbul for several years, where he in fact maintained a seraglio, or a harem. Is that exotic or what? His uncle, who was in charge of his affairs back home, was simply terrified that in a few years every boat from the Far East would have these youngsters coming up to his door, demanding support as the son of Lord Baltimore. He wrote a book about his travels in the Middle East. That was the very fashionable thing to do, was to take an exotic trip and then come back in London and write a book about your travels. Travel journals or travel books were very popular. Horace Walpole, the great Horace Walpole, wrote that Lord Baltimore's book proved that any man may, God, I can't read my own
travel
book.
without observation and be an author without ideas.
Yeah, read that again. Any man may, what is it?
Travel without observation and be an author without ideas.
Yes, Walpole said that. I mean, that was bad. You can actually get that on Google, and I got it, and he was right. That is an atrocious book. It's quite long, and what he does is he says, and then I reach such and such, which, as so-and-so says, is, and then he'll quote for like 20, 30 pages. He just rips it out of another book and just quotes. And then he said, and then we went on to such, which, and then so-and-so says, and ridiculous. Frederick finally resettled back in London and promptly got himself embroiled in a sensational scandal. In 1768, he was indicted for the abduction and rape of Miss Sarah Woodcock. Sarah Woodcock was the daughter of a good family, kind of lower middle class, but not below that. They were known Methodists, and some of Lord Baltimore's defenders said it was really the Methodists trying to get at this high church Anglican here. But in any case, he was accused of abducting her and raping her. It went to trial, and back then, of course, in the 18th century, a jury of your peers was exactly that. So if you're a member of the peerage, all of your jurors are going to be members of the peerage as well, kind of stacking the deck against the complainant. And in fact, they found him innocent, saying, in effect, that Miss Woodcock had not tried hard enough to escape. She had been seen by witnesses on the arm of Lord Baltimore walking inside the gate of his estate just outside of London, and so that was enough to throw the jury into the innocent camp. He also is said to have bribed some of the peers on the jury, but who knows? It was so overwrought in terms of reportage there that you really don't know what happened. Immediately after the trial, one of his many former mistresses, this one named Sophia Watson, published a memoir called The Memoirs of the Seraglio of the Bashaw of Maryland by a Discarded Sultana. That too actually is that's available on Amazon as one of their weaker books. I've never bought it. I've got to do every year when I do this lecture. I think I've got to go home and order that and see what it's about. But that's a wonderful title. Lord Baltimore, even though he'd been found innocent, he was so reviled by the population at large, including members of the peerage, his equals, that he decided that he would head out of England again, where he'd spent much of his adult life, and resettled this time in Italy, where he died in 1771, lamented by remarkably few. He dies in 1771, and he has no heirs. He has many, many, many heirs, but none of them are legitimate. So he left Maryland to a 13-year-old illegitimate son, Henry Harford by name, after whom Harford County is named. And so this teenager got Maryland, but not the title. He could not be Lord Baltimore because he was an illegitimate heir, not a legitimate heir. So the title of Lord Baltimore became extinct in 1771 with the death of Lord Baltimore. Frederick, Lord Baltimore, really did only one thing that benefited Maryland much at all. And that was to appoint a really splendid governor. He appointed Horatio Sharp as governor in 1753, so not long after he became proprietor of Maryland. Sharp had a military background. He was remarkably able. He was from a large family that had, for several generations, been born and bred to serve at the highest levels in British government. Military commissions, high church offices, prominent lawyers. They were not in the peerage, they were not titled, but they served the peers. They were very, very well connected at that highest level. One of his brothers, for example, was an Anglican clergyman who was the clergyman to the Prince of Wales. So, I mean, they were that kind of connected family. So he appoints this very able person as governor, and he brings along, most notably, a man as secretary by the name of John Rideout. And of course, that's a name we all know. It's the Rideout House on Duke of Gloucester Street. Orlando Rideout, the fourth or fifth, who passed away a couple of years ago, was one of the leading architectural historians in Maryland. His father, Lanny Rideout's the great historian, founder of the Maryland Historical Trust, who's written the book on the Bryce House, and his Lanny's daughter, Molly Rideout, is the head horticulturalist at the Haga House. So started a long line in terms of the write-outs in their contributions to Maryland in this area.